It's almost summer and the Mustang is not running. We need more storage. The scraps thing isn't paying.
We gotta
get
bills.
back on the glass bar. We have a whole other project
It's 1,000
to
degrees
work on the glass bar. Want to work on the scraps thing, but we need to actually. The scraps thing isn't paying the bills.
It's 1,000 degrees outside.
We need to work on the glass bar. There's not enough time today.
Snap the f out of it. We have work to do. All right, ladies and gents, welcome back to another scraptastic evening here at the stable. As you guys heard, we have a lot of work to do, so let's get to it. Previously on the channel, we worked on the fuel delivery system for our Phytech unit, which included making all of the A and N fittings for the stainless steel braided line, fuel filter location, and setting up our fuel tank with its required EFI fuel pump module, as well as the fuel sending unit. But one thing we did not do is route the return line. The return line, as you guys know, is going to follow the same route as the feed line, but luckily the return line should be much easier to install compared to the feed line, and that's because we only have to make two connections. One at the return side of the throttle body, and one way back here in the tank. As you can see, we already have our feed line plumbed in. The return line is the only thing that's left. Pressure line, or the feed line, had to be cut in 3 different sections in order for us to fit both fuel filters. And also huge thanks to Demon View for this episode's coffee. I'm going to start off with the throttle body connection first. That way, once we hook it up, we can route it towards the back and it'll be easier. Luckily, Phytech included a bunch of fittings, so we still have some left over, and we had more than enough to cut up all our sections. We're going to start off with a new cut just to make sure the ends aren't frayed. Going to add some of the included masking tape. All right, let's see if we could get a close-up of what we got going on here. All right, we can see here that it did not fray much. Next step is to add the fitting, and the goal here is to put this fitting on without any of those ends fraying outwards, and the way I do that is I cup it through the bottom, and from here I start pushing in from the outside inwards and take it step by step, because if I get too ahead, I really can't put these things in. All right, once this fitting is slipped over, I'm going to do some left-hand turns to push it downwards. And just like last time, I'm going to place a small piece of tape in order to know if the hose is being pushed out once we add the second part of the fitting. All right, with a little bit of lube on the tip, with a little bit of lube, we're gonna slip this guy on here. Threading this in can possibly push the hose out of this fitting, so that's what the tape is for. All right. The tape did not move one bit. It's a good fitting. All right, with our hose end fitting done, now we can thread on this portion for the return line, and now we could get a sense of how we want to route this. I think something like that. What do you guys think? We're gonna fish the rest of the hose downwards and back south. That's kind of it right there. That's how it's gonna look in the engine bay. What I don't really like is how it kind of, the gap kind of opens right there, then it closes back up down here, how it's closed up here. Somebody did mention chances of fraying if they're together, but I don't even think the engine will make it that long. So I've changed my mind. Again, I am going to keep the lines separated. I want to keep them pretty close to each other though, just in case to prevent any chafing or anything through this braiding. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to add a second clamp right about here, and maybe another one down here. All right, so both the return and the feed line are now secured inside the engine bay with its according clamps. There is a bit of separation between the two. I'm not in love with it, but it's not terrible. It doesn't look crazy bad. I just don't really like how they don't look uniform. Like there's a random gap here and So it just, the gap opens and closes and opens and closes, but that's just me being too picky. I don't know why I want to make it aesthetically pleasing in the engine bay when the car isn't that aesthetically pleasing itself. But that is it, and it still has enough flex for engine movement as well. And now we gotta head down south. All right, from the underside of the car, if you guys did not forgetty spaghetti, it runs down from the engine bay and then it goes to our cross member right here where we have one clamp holding the pressure line. In this case, since we already have a hole drilled right here, we're going to use the same hole for the two different clamps. We're not going to, so if the clamp lips are like this, we're not going to stack them on each other. We're gonna close the clamp, close the other clamp, and put it like that, if that makes sense. And just like that, both of those lines are secured. All right, I think we're about done securing that return line. Let's check it out. As you guys saw, we get from the throttle body injection all the way down here, and from the engine bay, it goes down to this cross member where it is secured by two clamps. From here, it'll then go to the transmission tunnel where it is also held by two different clamps. A little further up, we put a bolt on this one compared to a clamp because on the inside of the car, that is right by where the seat belt is, and I don't feel like having a sharp pointy screw somewhere where I might slice myself. From there, it then goes on to two separate clamps right here. These were not butted together just because of space. Then right here, we still have to get a separate bigger clamp for the fuel filter itself. But that line is secured, and then we have the double clamp set up right here as well. And right over the axle, we have two separate clamps holding the lines individually to separate them off into the trunk bay. Inside the trunk, we could see where our lines come out, and then it goes to our fuel pump assembly right here. So I have it marked to roughly where I want the line cut, where we want to add that AN fitting. So now in order to cut that line and to add that fitting, we have to undo everything that we just did and completely take that line out. So let's get to it. All right, we have all of the spaghetti out. Let's make our last fitting. All right, we've cleaned out the fuel line. Now it's time for the annoying part. Gotta pull off the tape without pulling the strands. What? This one's going in really easy. Something almost doesn't seem right. All right, yeah, that went in really good. Let's see how far I could thread this in by hand. That's about it. All right, and our tape line didn't move. Good fitting right there. All right, so we now have our custom length return line. Let's redo everything we just undid. Guys, it's so hot in here that I've had to start working half naked, but you're gonna have to get on our Patreon to see that. Alrighty, last thing to do for our fuel system is just hook up this return line. I did make it a tiny bit too long, it seems, but we could add some slack towards the bottom area. I'm sure it'll be fine. So our fuel system is now ready to rock. From the high pressure fuel pump all the way up to our Phytech unit and then back to our return system. And as you guys can see here, this is what I meant by we cut the line a little bit too long, but we could make up that slack at the bottom. A lot of people shy away from these EFI systems because they have a return style system. And for those of you that don't know, a return style system just sends fuel back to the fuel tank that is unused or not needed. That is literally all it does, but there is some magic that happens with that. I've spoke about it before. With carburetors, the fuel tends to sit in this area in a hot engine bay hooked up to a hot block, and the fuel we have nowadays containing ethanol will boil and vaporize in the fuel lines, causing vapor lock. But with the magic of a return style system, it does not sit here heat soaking and boiling up. It gets returned all the way back to the fuel tank, which will then cool it down and then cycle it all through again. I would recommend a return style system even for a carburetor equipped car. Actually, I would recommend it even more for a carburetor equipped car. Like I've said, I've daily driven these cars for years through this Arizona summer heat, and boy, let me tell you, they do not like the heat. So having this return style system will prevent or at least reduce the chances of us getting vapor lock. Also, speaking of cooling, I got something pretty exciting to show you guys. We've got ourselves what I would consider to be the best of the best in terms of cooling solutions. A 16-inch puller fan that will produce 2,310 CFM. And this is from Steel Racing Products, which is a local company here in Tucson. And please don't think that because it is a local company, it is just some Joe Schmo working out of his backyard. Steel Racing Products has worked with many big companies, including but not limited to, you may have heard of them, you may have not, but their client list includes names like Lamborghini, SpaceX, NASCAR. Should I go on? They are pretty low-key in the regular consumer world, but please do not underestimate them as they know their stuff. Anyway, so why am I fangirling over this product? And pun intended. This isn't just any regular old electric fan that you buy off the shelf or buy from Amazon. The magic is all right here. This is a brushless electric motor, which will give us tons of benefits in comparison to a brushed motor. Brushless, Angel, what the hell does that mean? For one, that means we're going to have less amp draw, which means that it's going to be nicer to our electrical system. With less amp draw, that means less heat towards the wires, less heat towards the motor, which I also want to point out that brushless motors typically tend to last a lot longer than brushed motors. And also another feature about this fan that I am more than excited about is that this motor has the capabilities to do a soft start. So what does that exactly mean? Most electric fans, when they start or get power, they'll instantly kick on. So then your electrical system and the fan motor are trying to instantly get this thing up to speed, which generally means your electrical system will suffer a huge spike in amps in current in order to get this thing up to velocity. But that's not the case here, buddy. With that soft start feature, this brushless motor will gradually accelerate this fan until it gets to its intended speed, and that, my friends, will prevent that spike in amperage that we were talking about earlier. Huge thanks to Steel Racing Products for being our cooling solution. Hopefully, if all goes well, that will not be the only cooling product that we will use from them, but I won't give too much away. We'll see that in the future. On one of the previous videos, we were unable to get the T5 properly mounted into the stang, and that was simply because we had the wrong block separator plate. As you can see, these holes do not line up. Ta-da! We have the right one now. And guess what that means, guys? Another time that the engine has to come out. How the hell did this guy get in here? Yo, dude, you don't even pay rent here. Now we're right where we were 2 weeks ago, where I installed and removed this flywheel about 10 times. Oh my God, I'm a freaking idiot again. You see, God, last time I had to undo and redo this thing for the same exact reason I have to undo it and redo it right now. I just know some of you are yelling at the screen again. How bad is that if I dropped it? Honestly, you can't even fake being that dumb. I'm just naturally like that. See, we did it. We're not that much of idiots, right? I can't believe I almost did it again. Anyway, our new block separator plate is in. All right, now it's time to throw this guy in. But remember guys, this transmission is missing half its guts, so it's not actually going to do anything. We're just using the housing or the shell of it so it can hold the starter and help us start this engine. It might be 75 pounds when it has guts, but it's still pretty heavy. All right, time to wrestle this guy back in there. Yeah. All right, the engine is now in place. It's locked and loaded and bolted down. I'm hoping that that was the last time we had to take it out before we give it its first start. It's staying in there, I hope. And now our starter will actually bolt into place. And speaking of starter, we opted to go with a high torque mini starter because these are lightweight compared to the original ones from the 60s. And continuing on the theme of amperage, this starter will also draw less current, so it'll get our wires less hot. But if you guys notice, we have a starter solenoid on here. And we also have a starter solenoid down here in the ignition hub. Double the solenoid, double the function? Not exactly. You see, the cars from the 60s did not have this large solenoid on the starter itself. It was just one big fat heavy assembly with one stud coming out of it. So we're basically just going to bypass this solenoid when the power arrives to it. And the way to understand how we do that, we have to understand where the power is going to come from. So this solenoid right here is basically the same thing as the one on the starter. Our battery power is coming from here and gets hooked up to this terminal. When we turn the key to activate the starter, this stud right here is going to send power to this terminal. And that is basically the same thing that is happening here. This stud right here is going to have 12 volts from the battery, and this one is going to be hooked up to the ignition switch. So once you turn that key, it'll send power from this stud to this one right here, activating the starter. So once again, power from the battery gets sent to here. When we turn our ignition key, it'll switch the power onto this stud. This stud will then power this stud right here, which is usually hooked up to the battery power. The only difference is that we are going to jump these two studs. That way, once the starter solenoid inside the car sends its power over to this stud, it will immediately activate the starter solenoid. And once we switch the ignition from start, neither of these will have power, disengaging the starter and pulling back that gear. We could run the wire connected to the ignition switch directly down to here and have it work normally, but that's just one less wire that we have to have in the engine bay, so I'd rather do it that way. And to save time, I'm going to use the cable that they included. It's obviously way too long to do a little jump, right about here. And our little jumper cable is going to simply go like this. I probably could have made it a tiny bit shorter, but it'll do. We can't exactly wire this in just yet. We have to make some modifications to the firewall in order to accommodate that wire coming off that solenoid on the inside to power this guy. But there is something we can do. Yeah, look at that. Plenty of room for activities. Look at this. It doesn't even touch, which is usually a huge issue for these cars. There's not enough room for a big enough electric fan, but with our engine relocation, she fits no problem. All right, ladies and gents, it is now time to do the final install on the Phytech unit. It's time, ladies and gents. It's time for the tape to come off. Yeah, included gasket and the cherry on top. Voila. It's backwards. Sorry. My mistake. Time to add all of our nuts. Look, and this right here is a very important thing to note that you shouldn't do. Do not carry a bunch of things in your hand while you're in the middle of assembly. The mechanic I used to work with at a flight school would always yell at me for doing that. I had too much things in my hands, and just now I felt like he was gonna yell at me even though he's not here. It's important because with a lot of things in your hand, you tend to struggle more, and then you're more likely to drop something in some place that's not supposed to be dropped. Yeah, doesn't she look good? Time to make our final connections, tighten everything up. The lines are hooked up, ladies and gents. That Phytech throttle body is now fully installed. Sorry, it's not plugged in exactly, but it is installed. So our throttle body's in, fuel system is complete. We have our radiator and our new cooling fan thanks to Steel Racing products. We don't have radiator hoses just yet, but now that I'm realizing it, us moving the engine 5 inches backwards might have or might create an issue for the radiator hose length. So what do we have left to do in order to turn that key? It's mostly wiring, so it shouldn't be that bad, but we have to wire the alternator, the starter, the spark plugs, the fuse box, and we have to wire the battery. And speaking of battery, we got a package.